Recording, there we go. All right, well, it's 7:03 p.m., so let's get started. I am Councillor Glen, and really happy to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar about revitalizing Stittsville Main Street. Tonight, I'm going to share with you some of the feedback that we received from all of you, what we heard from the community about our initial discussion paper that we published way back in January. It seems like such a long time ago. I guess it was nearly, I guess, 10 months ago that we published that discussion paper. So I'm going to present to you a bit of a high level of how we got here, what we heard from the community, some of the results from the survey and from the workshops and feedback that we did. And then I also want to open the floor to some discussions and Q&A and some more feedback from people. And then we'll talk about what's next, some next steps in this whole process. As we go, there is a chat function on the screen. I think the chat is activated. Yes, it is. I'm just going to put in a web address here right now. It's on my website. It's glengower.ca/Stittsville Main. And if you haven't already, go to that link and you will see a blog post on the website, and you'll find a place where you can download the whole PDF file summarizing all of the feedback. So I'm going to give you a high level today, but if you go to glengower.ca/Stittsville Main, you can read the whole document yourself. It's, I think, about a dozen pages, so a lot of information to go through. We'll do the highlights tonight, but I hope you can find some time on your own to read the document as well. And if you have questions as we go, you can use the Q&A panel that you'll find on Zoom as well. So there's a button that you'll see for Q&A. You can enter a question there, and I'll answer those questions. If you're on Facebook too, we'll be keeping an eye on the Facebook live stream as well. So if you have a question, you can add it there. There's a lot of we've got some questions that came in from email as well. So we'll try to go to about 8 p.m. Maybe we can go a bit later if we get lots of questions, but that's the plan for tonight. So let me go back to the presentation. So I want to talk first of all about how we got here, how we got to this point. I want to go back to when I first realized what Stittsville Main Street was all about. This is a photo from the Parade of Lights, organized every year by the Stittsville Village Association. Unfortunately, this year we won't have a parade due to COVID, but in a normal year, this is one of my favorite traditions on Stittsville Main Street. You see so many people coming out to the street, seeing neighbors, seeing all the different organizations and businesses that contribute to our community here in Stittsville. But the moment for me was actually the day after one of these parades several years ago, and I volunteered to help clean up the barricades. So what that involved was a group of volunteers with a large cube van. And we traveled down Stittsville, Maine. We started at Brown's and we walked all the way to the library. And we picked up these barricades, but we walked Stittsville Main Street. It was the first time where I actually had an opportunity to walk the length of Stittsville Main Street from Brown's to the library and back, rather than drive. And it was a real eye-opener to the possibilities on the street, some of the challenges on the street. And to me, it was, I think, the first time that I realized that there was really something special about Stittsville Main Street, and that there was a lot of possibility for the street. In 2015, I was in the room here. This was 5 years ago. This is a presentation by Mark Young, who's a city planner, and he was introducing the new Stittsville Main Street Community Design Plan. So the city went through a long exercise to come up with basically a technical planning strategy for Stittsville Main Street around zoning, around some of the road design and so on. And it's a good document, but I think what it doesn't have is any kind of, it's got lots of technical direction around zoning and bylaws and so on. But it doesn't have a lot of vision about how we actually achieve that, how we attract new businesses, how we get to a point where we're actually revitalizing. So it's a document that planners will use anytime there's a new development application, and they'll analyze that development application against the community design plan. But that's about all that it does. It doesn't really launch a real vision beyond that. So I recognize that as a resident that, we needed some more advocacy. We needed some more vision around what Main Street could become. And it became one of the themes 2 years ago in the election. Um, we put up signs. You may remember these up and down Stittsville Main Street about revitalizing Stittsville, Maine. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by the number of people, when I was knocking on doors, who said, yes, Stittsville Main Street is something very important to me, and we would like to see some attention to it. And for the last few years, again, this year we couldn't do it, but I've been doing Jane's Walks, which are walking tours down Stittsville, Maine. And every year they get bigger and bigger. This is a photo from 2019. And we had, I think, about 100 people, which is almost too many for a walking tour. So to me, that just, again, shows the incredible interest that people have in this street and learning about the history, but also talking about the future of the street. So this brings us to January 2020, earlier this year, when we published a discussion paper called Revitalizing Stittsville Main Street. And what I wanted to do was collect all the ideas that I'd heard over the past 5 years or so into one document and put these out into the community. We broke it down into different themes like beautification or events or traffic, for example. And we held a number of workshops. We did an online survey to gather feedback from the community. So a number of ways that we did the engagement. We had an online survey. We had in-person workshops. We did 2 of those just at the beginning of March, really, really well attended and some great ideas. We did community pop-ups. So we did kind of random events in different spots in the community. I remember one we did at the Brew Revolution in the Jackson Trails Plaza at the north end of Stittsville, Maine. We spoke with a number of community groups, went out and talked to their meetings. We had some individual meetings with different businesses and stakeholders. And then we held a virtual workshop in April once COVID hit. And we gathered a lot of feedback, and that's what's captured in the What We Heard document that's on my website. So what did we hear? I think there were a few themes that came through loud and clear. We heard a lot about the history of the street. We heard a lot about a need for better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. We heard that you want a greater variety of businesses there. We've heard that you'd like more beautification on the street. So a lot of common themes. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just walk through some of the high level feedback that we received from the survey, because I think it gives a pretty good summary of what the public told us throughout this engagement process. So one of the questions that we asked was, we asked people to describe the type of businesses that they think will contribute to a healthy street. And the number one piece of feedback was around restaurants, pubs, cafes, coffee shops, places to go out and eat. I noticed in the last few weeks, there's a new coffee shop that's open at Stittsville, Maine and Bray called Honey. So there's an example of the type of business that people would like to see. Another one is small, local, and niche specialty stores. This came up again and again in the workshops and the feedback as the type of businesses that people would like to see. I think overall, people are looking for a real variety in what they're seeing there, and something special and unique that gives us a different reason to go to Stittsville Main Street than maybe a strip mall on Hazelden Road, for example. Some unique and local shops and services for the street. Another question that we asked, I've just got to move my cursor so I can see it here. How do you think the street should function for transportation? How do we balance cars, buses, pedestrians, and bikes? This was a really interesting, we had a lot of discussions, I remember in particular at the workshops, about finding the proper balance here. I think there's no clear consensus on this, although the direction that we seemed to be clear was people, as I mentioned before, wanted to see less car traffic and certainly less truck traffic, and safer facilities for cycling and for pedestrians. I think that came through loud and clear. Maybe I could touch on that a little bit, is that right now Stittsville Main Street is operating like basically like a highway, moving vehicles as quickly as possible from Hazelden Road down to Fernbank, essentially. And if we want to be able to support the variety of businesses that we want to have there, we're going to have to turn it more into a main street, which likely means the traffic is going to move a little bit slower because people will be coming in and out of the businesses, and we'll have more foot traffic and so on. So that's a pretty big transformation that we're going to need to see on the street in order to achieve what people are looking for here, and the environment that we're going to need to foster a really strong local business community. We asked about what you'd like to see around the beautification of Stittsville Main Street. I mentioned this earlier. It's really important for people to maintain a small town historic feel. The core of Main Street is based around the old railway station, and the Trans-Canada Trail used to be the old rail line. And so there's a real desire to keep the history, and we have a number of older buildings there, including the now it's the Hudson's Insurance Building at Stittsville Main and Abbott. Was once the Greens Hotel or Butler Hotel, I believe. And has heritage designation, that really nice 3-story brick building at the corner. You also want to keep the ornate lampposts and decorate them. One thing we heard a lot about was to have banners or decorations coming off of the light posts, like you would see in many small towns in Ontario. More green space, more trees. We heard as well about links to Pool Creek, which crosses over the street at Warner Colpitts Lane. So better links with the natural areas that are there. We asked about activities. What can we do to help animate the street? There's a lot. If you open up the document on one of the last pages, there's a big list of the many individual activities that people recommended and had suggestions for. But I think I'm encouraged to see that more events taking place in the park. This is Village Square Park. There are some events there. There's a farmer's market that happens most weeks now. There's the annual Arts in the Park that takes place in non-COVID years. But they always bring out just dozens, hundreds, lots of people, and add so much life to the community. I was just speaking today with a few community volunteers. One thing we're actually hoping to do this winter is to set up an outdoor skating rink at Village Square Park. So we're coming down to the wire on getting the logistics up and running, but I think it'd be a great thing to encourage recreation and to get people outside this winter when there's not as many indoor options. So something we're working on to bring more events and activities to the park. Where do you think it makes sense to start? This is, I think, a really important question because there's so many great ideas. The challenge is always, where do we focus and where do we launch from? And it was really interesting to me how many people pick better transportation and mobility and accessibility. And I guess it makes sense. If it's easier for people to get around, if people feel safe and comfortable in that environment, that could be a really good place to start to build a bit of momentum to get more people visiting the street. Park and street beautification is another top response, and economic development. I mean, obviously a great way to bring people out to the street is to have a healthy mix of businesses in order to attract customers. And I really think we're just, maybe a few restaurants away, 2 or 3 restaurants away, 2 or 3 really unique shops to having a good ecosystem of businesses that can really start some momentum on the street. What should the city of Ottawa's role be in the revitalization of Main Street? The number one response, develop a cohesive plan in terms of design and infrastructure. Yes, absolutely. That's what the community design plan that I mentioned earlier is meant to be. It does lay out a blueprint for the types of development that are permitted there. For example, there's a 4-story limit as to new buildings that can be built there. Buildings are supposed to have retail on the bottom and a mix of housing and office use on top, so that we get mixed use, which means we have not just residential or not just commercial, but a variety of different types of uses for a different piece of land. That's a good thing. You'd also like to see the city fund various aspects. And then there's an emphasis on road safety and solving some of the traffic issues, better bus and rail road maintenance, and beautification. So, excuse me, these are all things that the city could be involved in. One thing that I remember mentioning at the workshops is that when we've looked at other healthy main streets across Ontario, the ones that really have success are where there's a real partnership between different stakeholders, certainly the municipality, but also the local businesses, local community associations, residents. So there's a lot of different parties that work together, that need to work together in order to achieve a healthy Main Street in any community. Now, also in the document that we published a few weeks ago, we came up with 4 recommendations. So this is about where we go next with the future of Stittsville Main Street. So I'm going to walk you through these. Number 1 is to establish a steering committee. So I guess building on what I just said, healthy main streets are healthy because you have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of different groups getting involved to contribute to the success. And so what I'm recommending is that we establish a steering committee of about a dozen people, and that would include some local businesses for sure, could include some members from some of our local associations, the Business Association or the Village Association or the Rotary or the Lions Club. There's also a number of residents who've reached out who have a particular interest or expertise, maybe retired city planners or architects who want to contribute in some way. So that's the first recommendation, is that we establish a steering committee to guide the next steps and guide these projects going forward. The second recommendation is to improve cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. This one's a bit of a challenge because although the community design plan has a recommended design for lane configuration and sidewalks and wider sidewalks, cycling, parking on the street, the plan as it stands is to make changes to the street as there is development happening adjacent to the street. So an example, there's a new project by Huntington at the corner of Stittsville Main and Orville. You'll see the pit that they've dug and the big red crane. Well, as part of that, they were required to dedicate a large piece of land at the front of their property so we could get a larger sidewalk. And that's part of the community design plan from 5 years ago. But it's only happening because of the development that's adjacent to the street. Now, if we have to wait for the entire street to be redeveloped, we could be 20 or 30 years before we have a consistent configuration of the road that'll, add wider sidewalks and add bike lanes. To me, that's too long, and I'm going to work with city staff to see if we can find a way to speed that up or have some interim measures in place. I noticed the Transportation Committee this week approved a pilot project on Elgin to install something called quick curbs, which are kind of a temporary or non-permanent rubberized curb intended to protect cyclists in kind of an ad hoc bike lane. So maybe there's some innovative solutions like that we could look at to improve cycling and pedestrian infrastructure in the short term. There's also things we can do too, like crosswalks. We're adding one near the municipal parking lot in the next few months. So there's other things we can do in the meantime as well. The third recommendation is to explore economic incentives for businesses and redevelopment. There's examples in Ottawa and across the province where there's specific economic programs, sometimes tax incentives or other financial incentives to encourage redevelopment in target areas. So that's something that I want to explore with the steering committee and the local business association, as well as our city's economic development department, to figure out what options we have to encourage new local businesses, small businesses to set up shop on Stittsville Main. And the last thing that I think is important is establishing some benchmarks. We need to do some kind of study just to see where we're at now and to measure success against in future years. For example, what is the inventory of vacant land along the street? Or what does it cost to rent per square foot in a building? How many homes or apartments do we have on the street right now? What's the vacancy rate? How many units are vacant for commercial or residential? These are all things that would be important to know to help the steering committee and any kind of activity that we do on the street help gauge whether or not we're getting closer to a revitalized Main Street. Are we making progress, and what do we need to do? So what's next? The immediate next step, as far as I see it, is to get that steering committee going. So what we're going to be doing within the next few weeks is a call for interest to businesses, residents, and stakeholders. And I know there's actually a lot of interest. I've already been receiving emails from people who want to be a part of this committee. We want to keep it manageable. Like, we want to keep it to 12 people or so, because we want it to really be a committee that can roll up their sleeves and get things done and have some efficient meetings, but really be able to get some action and some progress out of it. And in my experience, if you get too big on a committee, sometimes you get bogged down. So we're going to try to keep it to about a dozen people. And I'm going to be launching this on my website and through my newspaper column and email newsletter and social media. We're going to do a call for interest and ask people to get in touch with us in a bit of a formal way to tell us why they want to participate. And then we're going to try to put together a mix of people who can help move forward on some of these projects. So if this is something you're interested in, watch for this in the coming weeks through my website and different communications channels. And thank you to everyone who has already reached out with some interest. So I've done a lot of talking here, and I guess if I'm answering questions, I'll do some more. I'm starting to lose my voice here. I do see some questions coming in the chat panel, so I'm going to answer some of those as we go. If you have a question, use the Q&A. I know we have Facebook too, so I better keep an eye over on Facebook as well as we go, and bear with me here as we try to get through as many of these as possible. I actually want to start with a question we got by email the other day. Just a second here. Okay, I found it. This is a question from Dan, and his question was, obviously the makeover of Stittsville Main Street will not happen overnight. That being said, what upgrades will be done now, like the street or sidewalk lights that are in poor shape and are beyond repair, which brings the look of our street a poor image when driving through? So Dan, I couldn't agree more. In particular, the lights that you've pointed out, those decorative light standards that we have there are certainly an eyesore, and the certainly an eyesore for those street lamps. And the city is out of inventory on them, and the manufacturer that Goulburn Township first bought them from in the 1990s no longer produces them. And it seems like about once every couple of months, there's a vehicle that hits one of those lights. And when we lose those lampposts, they can't be replaced. So it's a bit of a problem. I've been working in that case with the city's right-of-way department, which is the group responsible for decorative street lighting. So I can say that decorative street lighting is something that we would like to start replacing the next couple of years. Because it is something we need to fix as soon as possible. There's other street furniture, like there's a number of benches along the street that do need replaced. They're in pretty bad shape. So as maintenance is needed, I'm asking the city to put those on a priority list to get those done, and we will get to those. The other one that we're looking at is, can we do an improvement of the Abbott and Stittsville Main Street intersection? It's been torn up a number of times. It's not really functioning well from a pedestrian point of view. So that's another near-term thing that I'm hoping we can work on. I saw a question here from Andrea, who's with the Stittsville Business Association. Hi, Andrea, who's asking what participation rate did we have in the survey? That's a good question. I'm going to have to refer back to the document here. Just a second here, Andrea. Number of people responding. We had a great response, as we always do, to anything on Stittsville Main Street, by the way. Just loading up the document here. All right, we did do the survey. Of course, now I can't find it. We had 183 survey responses to this online survey from people in the community. So thanks to everybody who filled that out. And that's I think that gives us a pretty good idea. In total, I believe we did a count, between workshops and online engagement through the survey and other feedback. We figure we reached around 400 people who shared some kind of a response or feedback to us. Okay, I'm going to go to the Q&A panel because there's a bunch of questions coming in here. Tim asks, where is the revitalization paper published? I'm just going to type it in the chat panel again. Actually, let me just copy the link here. Direct link to the PDF. If you're looking for that, the summary of the engagement, you'll see it right there. And or maybe Tim's looking for the original discussion paper. So let me see if I can find that link, and I can add that to the chat box as well. Okay, I'm going to type this in, discussion paper. So if anybody's looking for the original discussion paper, that's there. Question from Tim: how do you propose the local businesses get supplies without truck traffic delivering those goods? Okay, so I should clarify. One of the feedback we had was a suggestion to get heavy truck traffic off the street. What we'd be looking to do is remove through truck traffic. So if there's trucks that need to make deliveries, they would still have access. And if there's construction vehicles involved in building new buildings, they would have access. So we're not trying to limit trucks that are actually doing local deliveries. We're trying to limit trucks that are just passing through from north to south. The other thing is, in a lot of cities, we're seeing a trend where they're using smaller delivery trucks. So rather than the big 18-wheeler tractor trailers, that there's some smaller size trucks that would be sort of the last kilometer of delivery, that type of thing. So thanks, Tim, for that question. An anonymous attendee is asking, I mentioned a review that was undertaken in other municipal Main Street programs. Can you provide a summary of which communities? So I don't have a list in front of me, but as part of the engagement, we did reach out to, well, two things. We had a number of people through our workshops and through the surveys and through email who said, I've been to Community X in Ontario. I've been to this community that's done a great job with revitalization or with a healthy Main Street. You know, Almont, Perth are two local ones that came up quite a bit. And so we did get in touch with some municipal officials from those communities. We did try to have a look at material that was out there. So people brought up a number of ideas from different communities, and then my team and we also did some research and outreach as well. Lots of good questions coming in. Thanks, everybody. Bill asks, are we able to change a sidewalk to a shared pathway? Stittsville Main has sidewalks on both sides. Could one be asphalted over with a yellow line down the middle? And people in our region are used to sharing pathways. Those who don't want to interact with bikes can walk on the sidewalk. I would say, Bill, so the Stittsville Main Street Community Design Plan sets out a recommended, they call it a cross section, which shows where there's lanes of traffic and where there's sidewalks and where there's bike lanes. That's not the configuration that they recommended, but that doesn't say it couldn't be a possibility. One thing that tends to happen in road design and road planning is we're continually learning about what makes for a safer cross section of a road. So if there is a way to use pathways instead of sidewalks in order to provide safe passage for bikes and cyclists and pedestrians, certainly open to looking into that. There's nothing that's set in stone, and it's something that I hope that the steering committee and also discussions with the city's traffic staff, we can be looking at some options. One of the challenges on Stittsville Main is that it's a very different width. They call it a right of way, which is the width from basically property line to property line. So if you think of that right of way, that width in front of where Brown's and McDonald's is, there's quite a bit of room to be flexible around the configuration. If you get closer to the historic part of the village, there's less room that you have to configure the lanes and so on. So we're probably going to see a mixture of different approaches to have traffic moving and also to have safe cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. So thank you, Bill, for that question. Just going through our list. Kyla asks, what can we do to slow the speeders on Stittsville Main? I'm going to give you two thoughts on this. One is, as the street evolves into a healthier retail mix, naturally we're going to see that traffic speeds will slow down. I guess it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but can I give you an example? A few months back, this is before COVID, I was in Carleton Place going down the main street there. And I remember having to stop while I was driving down the main street because someone was parallel parking in their parking spot. And then I had to slow down again because someone was turning out of a business on a side street. I didn't feel inconvenienced at all by having to slow down because I was in that Main Street environment. And I think as Stittsville Main Street matures with the variety of businesses, I think we'll become more used to that street as a place that's there primarily to serve local businesses rather than to move vehicles through as quickly as possible. It'll also help once we get Robert Grant Avenue built. This is a north-south arterial road that'll eventually connect from Fernbank to the Queensway, and it should take a lot of pressure off of Stittsville, Maine. So that's one way that we can slow speeders, is just to the natural evolution of the street. The other thing that residents can do, and I really want to emphasize this, not just for Stittsville, Maine, but for all sorts of roads in our community, if you see unsafe driving behavior, please report it to Ottawa Police via ottawapolice.ca. Police are out in our community every day doing enforcement, and they take these reports from residents in order to focus where the enforcement happens. So if you see someone barreling down the street or running a red light, something like that, please report it to police. It's really, really important. So thanks, Kyla, for that question. All right. You know, there's two very, very similar questions, one from Patrick and one from Phil. Would you be supportive of the city establishing a new small business tax class, which would allow a special lower rate for small business? This is a new option to offer by the province in 2021. So yes, the province announced this possibility as part of their budget a few weeks ago, and it's something that we are definitely going to look at the city. I believe it's on the work plan to review in the first few months of 2021. I'm certainly interested in that possibility. I'm curious whether it would need to be applied across the whole city, or if it's better to apply it to some specific focused areas for economic development. The other thing that we have to be aware of is business property taxes are one of our sources of revenue for the city. And if we reduce and lower the rate for small businesses, we're going to have to collect more taxes from the other types of properties, industrial, other types of commercials, or even residential. So it is a possibility to lower business taxes, but then we need to find a way to bring in that income elsewhere, or have to cut some kind of services or activities with the city. So I'm certainly supportive of looking into it, and I just want to make sure that we'd want to make sure that a change to the property tax classes, and potentially lowering property taxes would actually encourage economic growth and economic sustainability for businesses. So thank you, Phil and Patrick, for asking almost the same question. There's lots of questions. I'm going to take a drink of water. Thank you, Christy, for your comment about evolution of speeding. I see some questions coming in on the chat. I see one here. Please do not slow Main Street speed. You will turn off visitors. And this is the real conundrum, because we heard both sides of things. I think you may have seen from the survey responses. Some folks said, widen the road. We need more capacity on the road. Well, others said we need more bike lines and more sidewalks. So yeah, obviously we can't do everything. So we're trying to look at where other cities have had success and what are the common factors. And one of them is, if you really want to have a healthy environment for people to visit small businesses, you really need to have vehicles traveling at a slower speed down Stittsville Main Street. I know it's hard to imagine now, and there's a lot that we need to do in order to support that. But I just want to share a little bit of the thinking behind that. There's a question here from Jennifer. How are we going to handle the intersection at Bray and Main Street by Jojo's and Honey Coffee? It's getting very dangerous, especially kids walking home from school. Yes, we've heard from a few people on this. Honey is the new coffee shop at Stittsville Main and Bray Street. This is an interesting thing, and we see this as new businesses open. What were formerly, lower traffic or unoccupied parts of the street. When new businesses open, they bring new traffic patterns and so on. Now, if it was an entirely new building being constructed, there'd be a number of traffic studies that the builder would have to go through. In this case, for the new coffee shop, they're setting up shop at an existing location that's already zoned for commercial. And so there's not not the same evaluation of traffic and so on. In this case, what we're going to be doing is likely this spring, we're going to be sending out the traffic crews to have a look at to do some surveying and monitoring of that part of the street. I said a long time ago to city staff, we should at least have a pedestrian crosswalk near Bray Street in Stittsville, Maine. But perhaps we're getting to the point where a traffic light is warranted. It's quite a long section of road from Abbott Street down to Carlton Cathcart, where there's the current traffic lights. So anyways, long story short, we're going to be doing a traffic evaluation in the spring once some of the patterns normalize. One of the challenges in doing traffic studies right now is we're seeing a much lower volume in rush hours and so on due to people working from home. So we want to make sure we're getting an accurate picture. It's not cheap to add traffic lights to a street corner. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we have to make sure that they're warranted and that they will actually have a positive impact in terms of flow of traffic, in terms of pedestrian safety, and so on. So thank you, Jennifer, for that concern. And I know we've heard about that from a number of people. I just had, I had a note from someone that they're not seeing what I'm sharing in the chat. And I just see why that is. Because, yeah, I see why they did. I was sending it to panelists rather than panelists and attendees. So here's a link to the discussion paper. Okay. And here's a link where you can find, whoops. You can take a little breath as I'm doing this here. So I shared in the chat a link to the original discussion paper. And now I'm going to share a link to the what we heard document. So this is the whole summary of all of the feedback from the survey and the workshops and everything. Thank you, Christy, for pointing that out. And I think I fixed that. So all panelists should have that now. Let's see. From Carolyn, what other main streets in Canada do you think could serve as a model for Stittsville? And do you see Stittsville becoming a model for other towns? I don't think I've yet to see a main street that has the same conditions as Stittsville. Let me try to explain some of the things that make Stittsville Main Street unique. One is it's never functioned as a traditional main street. It was kind of a highway almost, connecting. Stittsville, Maine was kind of a hub for communities like Ashton, Munster, Richmond, Carp, the old Hazelden community. It was never really a walkable street, and it was always more of a rural village that people would drive to. And what it's turning into now is more of a traditional main street that's more kind of walkable and so on. There is a lot of history on the street, but the history is focused to one small area. And we see a real variety from the Browns and the Farm Boy Plaza up in the North End to the retirement homes and schools, more institutional mix in midway through. Then you've got the historic district at Abbott Street. And then as you go further south, you have some later 20th century buildings that have been built there. And you've got the RV sales places as well. So there's an incredible variety of architectural styles and of conditions along that street that you really don't see in a lot of main streets. So are there any other streets that serve as a model? No, but a lot of main streets, you can look at some success factors and see how they could be applied here. And a lot of that is captured in the what we heard document. And do I think Stittsville could become a model for other towns? Absolutely. In fact, for other suburbs in Ottawa as well. We're pretty unique. Canada doesn't have a Stittsville Main Street. Barrhaven doesn't have a Stittsville Main Street. Barrhaven's going through a bit of a planning process. They'd like to have something in Barrhaven closer to Stittsville, Maine. So they're going to kind of artificially create more of a walkable, older style Main Street configuration. So yes, I think we can definitely become a model for other towns and other parts of Stittsville as well. So thanks, Carolyn, for that question. Corey asks, I know this is about Stittsville, Maine, but I'm wondering if there are any other working groups on developing other areas, such as Fernbank Road. Well, let's see. The Stittsville Business Association represents businesses across the ward, and they have a number of initiatives to support those businesses. There's also different planning documents. Like for Fernbank, there's the Fernbank Community Design Plan. And right now we're seeing a lot of home construction in Fernbank, but as the years go on in the near future, we're going to see more commercial development and so on. And that's all laid out in a master plan there. I think what I would encourage Corey and others who are interested in other parts of the community is talk to some of your neighbors and put together a group to try to start working on these things. There's all sorts of opportunities to improve our community, and it really takes the hard work and idea of volunteers. So Corey, I'd encourage you to approach it that way, and feel free to reach out to my office if you have any ideas. Monica, Monica, timing of lights is very important along Fernbank, all around Walmart, and turning left out of the medical center at the Lions Club. So timing of lights. So yeah, that's something that actually the city is continually monitoring. I know in this summer with the intersection of Stittsville Main and Abbott, we were seeing a lot more foot traffic and bike traffic crossing with the Trans-Canada Trail. And so we altered the times to give more crossing time and a quicker reaction time for people using the Trans-Canada Trail. So that's a continuing thing. And if you have a specific concern, send me an email about it. There's actually a city specialist who is an expert in light timing, and it's all done by computer to make sure that traffic flows as smoothly and as safely as possible. So thanks, Monica, for that question. Someone asked if I've been to Val d'Or. I have not been to Val d'Or, at least not with an eye to community design. I assume they've got a nice main street there. So thank you for that. I'll check that out the next time I'm towards Montreal. And then Christine says Unionville is somewhat similar. So yes, Unionville is a main street, as a community that's come up. She writes, it was a very busy thoroughfare until they built a bypass road. It was controversial at the time, with folks wanting widening versus those wanting the bypass. So yeah, I think traffic and car use is something that's a continuing issue in a lot of Main Street, a lot of downtown developments. And I think what we're seeing is a trend towards a focus on walkability first and foremost. Thanks, Christine. Excuse me. Lots of questions coming in. This is great. I'm going to just take a moment to catch my breath a little bit. I'm going to look at Facebook, because I know there's some people who are watching our Facebook live stream, and I'm not sure if we are getting questions via Facebook or not. And we are. So let me just move over to Facebook and answer some of those. There's a question about Bray Street and Stittsville Main, which we've talked about. And a couple people have asked, where's the links? I'll share those on Facebook later, the links to the discussion paper, but you'll see everything if you go to my website at glengower.ca/Stittsville Main. Okay, so I think we're caught up on the Facebook comments here, and we'll go back to Zoom. There are a bunch coming in the chat panel. I want to make sure I got all of those. Some comments, so thank you, Bill, for your comments. Bill writes, if we look at beautification, there needs to be a purpose to it. I drive through Canada and Bell's Corners, where interlock brick has been laid down and now is in disrepair. What's the purpose of this beautification? It is beautification. It's also a tactile surface, a different type of surface to better indicate pedestrian crossings. The challenge is sometimes in Ottawa's climate is the brick in the interlock tends to not, it needs a lot of maintenance as we go on. So it's both beautification as well as pedestrian marking or pedestrian differentiation, if that makes sense. There's another comment about cycling. Besides putting cycling on Stittsville Main Street, there may also be possibilities to use the side streets and look for ways to connect the side streets and sign the side streets a little bit better going north-south, because there's a lot of pathways, but sometimes they're hard to find. Here's Corey has a suggestion for a Main Street, Gold Stream Road in Langford, BC. It was very run down and is now such a beautiful place to walk and shop. So great idea. Okay. Lots of questions. So it's 7:47. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes or so. Steve Klein has 3 questions. Let's take them one by one. Steve, what is the mandate of the new steering committee and what is their timetable? Basically, the steering committee is to take some of these suggestions that we've been received, put some prioritization to them, and identify projects that that can be launched and that can be started. So I think the initial mandate of the steering committee will be basically to establish their mandate and their terms of reference. I'd like to hold a virtual meeting of that group in January or February of 2021. And I'd like to rely on the expertise of that group to help guide where it's going to go. So we haven't defined it too much other than what's in the document right now. And another question is, how will the committee interact with city planners, and will they pay attention to the work of the committee? Well, I'm going to be the council sponsor on that, and I'll be a liaison, a link between that committee and the planning department and different city departments. The committee as it stands doesn't or currently have formal standing, but one thing I'd like to explore is if we can have some kind of a formal mechanism to have it report up to either the city's planning committee or the city's economic development committee, just to give it a bit of accountability and to put a bit of a weight to its activities and recommendations, so that there's some awareness with city staff and other councillors. The third question is, how do we put a stop to the many development projects on the books for Main Street and Hazelden Road? It seems to me you were talking about long-term development, which will not have an impact on development in the next 3 to 5 years. I'm not totally sure what you're getting at there, Steve. A stop to development projects. I think there's a real, you know what? I did a whole YouTube video called, can we stop the growth? Because this question comes up a lot. Can we stop growth until we have better road infrastructure and transportation infrastructure? The short answer is no. The long answer takes about 45 minutes to explain. And I really encourage you to go to my YouTube channel, search for Councillor Glen, and you will see a video there about why we're seeing more growth and why transportation infrastructure is lagging behind. So I think that might be what you're getting at. It's a little bit complicated. I don't want to get into it here because it goes more broadly into planning. And I think it's a little out of scope for what I wanted to talk about in the 10 minutes that we have here. But please check out my YouTube channel or send me an email. I'd be happy to set up a call to talk about that. Peter had a very similar question. What's the role of the proposed steering committee? So we haven't totally established the role yet. And it's something that we're hoping to define over the next few weeks and into the new year. Phil, thank you for your comments on the tax rate differential. Tim has asked, can I show the presentation again, specifically the page referencing needed or wished for businesses? Sure, I can do that. By the way, this is all in the summary document as well. Let me just find this here. Okay, got the PowerPoint. Whoops. Then I've got to get back into Zoom. And I need to share my screen. All right, Tim, this is for you. I'll leave this up for a little bit as we go. These are the types of shops that people are interested in having more of. Claire is asking, do you have an update or timeline with regard to the new brew pub due to be developed at Stittsville, Main and Abbott? I actually don't know what's going to be developed there. I have met with the owners of the property, and they would like to do some combination of a restaurant and I believe some apartments, but we don't actually know the nature of what that is. It is a really important site right next to the Trans-Canada Trail. It's quite a large site. I anticipate we're going to get a formal proposal within the next few months. I'm actually surprised we haven't had it by now, but we're going to see that soon, and we'll share that with the community as soon as we receive it. So thank you, Claire. Christine asks, could the steering committee also help with improving cycling and pedestrian use using any new federal funds? Yes, absolutely. We are hoping that the federal government will be offering or making available funds to municipalities to improve active transportation, which would include cycling and pedestrian. And if there's a way that we can access that kind of infrastructure or stimulus funding, definitely I'd like to use it for Stittsville Main Street. So thank you, Christine, for that. I think I saw some questions or comments, or some comments in the chat, so just catching up there. All right, I'm going to look again on email, just see if we have any questions. We're caught up on email questions. I believe we're caught up on Facebook questions. So that's good. Lots of good questions today. All right, I'm happy to take a few more because we've got a few minutes left here, but we've covered a lot of ground. You know, you may have some questions after you read through the document or some additional feedback. I would love to hear from you. I want to just, before we wrap up, maybe, this is a drone photo that was taken, I think, 2 years ago. And it captures so much about maybe some of the challenges on the street as well as some of the opportunities on the street. Let me walk you through it. I don't know if you can see my cursor, so I'll try to describe it. On the left-hand side, there's a for sale sign. This is a lot that Christine was just asking about a potential brew pub. We don't know what's going in there. It'd be great to see a restaurant in that space. But this is a lot. It was an old heritage building that burned down in 2013 and a really, really important site for future redevelopment. Right now, the entrance to the Trans-Canada Trail looks quite a bit different. The province invested nearly $200,000 to build a trailhead, which is a landscaped gateway entrance to the Trans-Canada Trail. And that's really going to become an important gathering place. It already is starting to, actually, as Stittsville Main Street develops. We've got the big insurance building here that I think has such great potential. Wouldn't that be great to see as a restaurant with some tables and so on outside on the patio? A real heritage gem. There's a building you can see just past the intersection here with a blue building. There's a building you might recognize as you go down there. Whoops. It's got a red garage. That's being redeveloped into a distillery. Dunrobin Distillery has purchased that building, and they're hoping to distill vodka there. And actually, I think they're going to do hand sanitizer in the meantime. You've got Ivan's Meat and Deli, a great local shop. I mean, it'd be great to see more local family-owned businesses on the street. It's hard to see in the distance, but I think you can see the Legion sign. The Legion has plans to redevelop their property. That old building that they're in now is in pretty bad shape, and they'd like to do a redevelopment project to I guess reimagine, recreate the Legion, and make sure they can continue serving the communities and their members for decades to come. Next door to that, there's a great heritage building that was converted by Jennifer McGahan Interiors a few years ago. I think that shows with a little imagination and investment what a positive difference people with a vision can have on this street. We can't see it, but Village Square Park is just on the other side of that intersection. We have in the draft budget for 2021, we have $200,000 set aside to do a rejuvenation of the playground and some of the equipment in the park. So we're actually launching this week a public engagement session to get feedback on what people would like to see as part of that new playground. And as I mentioned before, we're really hoping to get a public skating rink set up this winter. So crossing our fingers we can get that off the ground. And of course, we've got Quitters here in the foreground, run by Kathleen Edwards. And I think it opened, let's see, 2014 is when it opened. And it just shows you what a great locally owned, unique coffee shop can do for the community. Quitters attracts people from all over Ottawa and really all over the world. The owner is Kathleen Edwards, who's a well-regarded singer-songwriter here in Canada. And it's actually become a bit of a tourist spot. And I know there's a lot of people who travel, who bike down the Trans-Canada Trail in the summer and make a point of stopping in for a coffee or a beer at Quitters. And wouldn't it be nice to add some more restaurants and cafes and shops that people can explore when they get here? Anyhow, a lot, you get a lot. Picture says 1,000 words, as they say. Just gonna look. Some comments coming in the chat, so I just want to read through there and see if there's any other questions. Bill has a comment about parking. He says, one of the things we are doing well is putting parking off the street behind and beside businesses, which suggests that we continue to build this idea into our planning. Yeah, I agree. And I think there could be a role for some parking on the street. It's something that commonly you see on main streets. But one of the advantages we have on Stittsville Main is a lot of the lots are really, really deep, leaving plenty of room in behind for for parking. So parking shouldn't be an issue as we go forward. We've also got that municipal parking lot. I think we're the only suburb in Ottawa with a municipal parking lot on the main street, which is something pretty unique for our community as well. I'm going to wrap up pretty soon. I just want to make sure. I see one more question here from Facebook, not related to Stittsville, Maine, but do I know what pharmacy and coffee shop is going in the No Frills Plaza? I don't, but I'm sure we'll find out soon. And always nice to see new businesses setting up. Oh, here's a question. A question I'm surprised hasn't come up yet today. So thank you, Reynold. Will the new buildings being built match the traditional quaint design, or will they be more modern? The answer to that is we're going to see a real mix. The community design plan, which is that master planning document that I talked about earlier, says that the buildings have to incorporate architectural elements that tie back to the historical architecture of the original village. So things like brick and wood and stone in some cases, but it doesn't explicitly set out an architectural style. I think that's a good thing, because in looking at other successful main streets, and even Stittsville's Main Street, you do see a lot of different styles. And I think I'd prefer to see some variety on the street, make sure that it's compatible and it's respectful of the architecture of the history. But I think it's a healthy thing to see a variety in styles. Look at any, go downtown actually and stand downtown. You'll see the Chateau Laurier, you will see modern buildings, you will see the Parliament buildings, all sorts of different architectural styles. And it adds a lot of interest and surprise and delight as you're walking down the street. So we will see a mix of architectural styles, and we do see a real mix of architectural styles right now on the street. So thank you, Ronald. Nancy asked, is there talk of opening up the train tracks to let the Skadoors go through and cross the main street? I don't think Skadoos or electric vehicles are allowed on the Trans-Canada Trail in this part, and I wouldn't want to see them there because we're seeing more foot traffic and more skiers. I think we'd have a lot of conflicts. I think we'd have a lot of conflicts if we allowed electric vehicles like Skadoos through that part of Stittsville Main Street. So likely not for that. Courtney. Okay, Courtney owns Pretty Pots. Hi, Courtney. On parking, she has a comment. The parking beside her building will be lost for both her customers and Quitter's customers. Can we make the public parking sign a little more noticeable for all our future customers and for the new businesses that might be moving to Stittsville? I think that's a great idea. We've actually been pursuing this with city staff around making that signage more visible where the parking lot is, but also to make it more visible if you're coming in on Stittsville Main Street, so people know there's a convenient and free place to park. So thank you, Courtney, and I hope we can get something set up soon for that. All right. Well, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. It's 8:01, and I think we're out of questions. Every time I say that, we get more, but I've got to stop sometime. Thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. Really good questions. I hope we get more feedback. And if you're interested in that steering committee, keep an eye on my email newsletter, my newspaper column, and my website. I'll be sharing some details about that soon. And in general, keep an eye on my website, because any new information about new developments, new activities, new funding, new investment for Stittsville Main Street, it's where I share all of that information. There's also a Facebook group called Friends of Stittsville Main Street. So if you are interested in taking part in discussion or learning about what's happening, that's a group there as well. So have a good night. Thanks for taking an hour out of your busy schedules to join us, and take care. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.